Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, the wonderful, the swanky, Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen.
Thank you.
Did you like swanky?
I did. I like that a lot.
I don't know how honest or truthful it is, but it's the word that came to mind.
The swanky, the foppish,
Oh,
the dastardly.
I shouldn't have
I think
used
that's
the
how
S.
these normally go.
Sorry. It's the S in swanky that I meant to get rid of. So, Jason, I don't know if you were able to see it in my video, but I think the listeners may have heard it in the recording, but I just re-uncorked, I should say.
I knew I could smell something around here.
I just uncorked my Single Cask Nation Mackmyra 13-year-old 2008 distillate, all 13 years in virgin oak. I just did that just to drink to prepare us for the interview that we're going to be presenting to our listeners in just a bit.
It was a lovely description. It was an accurate description. It was only missing one word.
Oh, shit. What was it? What did I miss?
Unreleased.
Oh, yes. It is unreleased. That's right. This Mackmyra, it has hit the States, but we haven't put it on sale yet. That is correct.
We have not.
Yeah.
We're still, as of the drop date of this episode, we're still about a couple of weeks away.
Okay.
About.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly 15 days away as this episode drops.
So listen, part of the reason that I poured this is I've got new things going on in my life, and I needed whiskey to talk about this. Just recently, my 15-year-old turned 16 years old, and on the day she turned 16, she got her driver's permit, her learner's permit.
Oi.
Yeah, exactly.
You need drink for that. Are you, as a parent, are you allowed to drink in the passenger seat when your 16-year-old is learning to drive?
Oh, I think it's compulsory. I think you're meant to do it. Yeah, it's encouraged.
If the police officer sees you not drinking, they pull you over and put a drink in your hand. I think that's how that works.
Sir, this is not safe. Please take this flask.
Wow. I thought I was seeing a few extra grey hairs in the hat and mop there.
So here's the thing, and it's funny, right? So I had been, hopefully no police are listening to this podcast, but I had been...
Especially not if they're on duty.
Exactly. I'd been quietly teaching her to drive, right? Taking her in parking lots and then driving around in, like industrial parks on the weekends, right? When no one's working, there's no cars going through there. So it's as safe as you're going to get. And then somewhat recently we started doing a little road driving. Again, this is before her permit. I'm a terrible passenger on the best of days.
You had me at person.
Did I say person? I said passenger. Did I say person?
Yeah. I'm a terrible passenger. Okay, I'll accept.
Oh, I did mean passenger. So
no, you said passenger.
Oh, I did. Oh,
in my head, I auto-filled with person.
Oh, right.
Jokes are funny when they're explained.
Yeah. Little peek behind the curtain there. Now I get it all. Anyway. And, it's, as we're getting to stop signs, I'm like grabbing the handle. I'm putting my feet up on the dashboard. And then the other day, Haida took her out driving. And she came home, she says, so Mom took me out driving. Then this was the legal part. She legally had her permit. And she said, she wasn't grabbing the handle. Her legs weren't up on the dashboard. She wasn't clutching her pearls. Like none of that.
She only screamed once. Please, Joshua, you have to tell Delma that I have had the misfortune of spending many an hour driving you around mostly Scotland, but occasionally in the US.
Yeah.
And you can let her know you are arguably the world's worst passenger. You scream, you do grab.
Yeah.
We've got you on wax screaming.
You do.
Just because I was overtaking a handful of cars, on our way to Campbelltown. It's a Madonna. So it's tough. It's tough being a driver in a car with you. So, which is funny because Delma and I have both been in the same number of car accidents, and your number, I think, is considerably higher than mine and Delma's.
Well, none of which were my fault.
Not pictured. Jason sipping his tea.
Yeah, listen, at the same time, however, you didn't get your license until you were like 40 years old or something. How old were you when you got your license? I have far more drive time under my belt.
As soon as you started that sentence, I was asking myself, what number is he going to pull out of here to make it humorous? Yes, I was 27 when I got my driver's license in the United States, and it's the first and only driver's license I've had. I was 17 when I received a bunch of lessons for my 17th birthday. So for listeners in the UK, at 17 is when you even start being a learner.
Okay. So obviously here in the US, you just need to be 13. You need to be 16.
It feels like it, dude. It feels like it. No, 13 to own and operate a gun.
To get a gun.
15 and a half to get your permit.
Yeah, so when I was 13, I got my first AR. I didn't get my license until I was 19. But still, so I had a good, because I'm a year older than you, I've got about 9.5 years on you. So I would say between 9 and 9.5 years from now, my guess is you're going to get into a number of accidents that will equal the number of accidents I currently have up to 2022.
I know the reason that you didn't get your driver's license until you were 19 is because you used to go around town like Marty McFly in the first Back to the Future movie.
That's true.
You were gripping the fenders of police cars and making your way to school around the town square under the broken clock.
Do you know I did that? But I did that in the wintertime. Oh, I did tell you. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah.
That's why I'm saying it now. You thought I was making a joke.
It's true. All of it.
Because it rhymes.
And so that's reason number one why I've poured, or actually reason number two why I've poured the Mackmyra. Reason number three is my 13-year-old, soon-to-be 14-year-old, just played her first rock concert.
Woo-woo.
That's right.
Tons of fun.
Yep.
Tons of fun.
Yeah, so it's a little nervousness around a new driver with excitement, but also a little like, one of my kids is playing music for people. I kind of like that.
Nice one. She's digging that life.
She is. She's been, she had this little concert just this past Sunday, and every day she would go downstairs and she would practice. And when she got bored of practicing, she'd go on to learning different songs, Radiohead songs, and playing a little bits and bobs of other songs, which is kind of cool. And yeah, she's digging it.
Nice one. Yeah. When does she go on tour? When is she hitting the road? That's when you have to be 14 in America to go on tour with your band.
So at 12 you get your first AR. At 13
13 is first
13
AR.
is the AR. At 14 you tour. At 15 you OD on something. Right?
Hopefully ice cream.
Yeah, you OD on ice cream. And then at 16 you get your license. And then at 18 you go to college. Nothing happens when you're 17.
So wait a second here. So you're busy saying in Connecticut you get your learner's permit at 16.
At 16, yeah.
Here in Virginia, so long as you pass the written test, you can get your learner's permit at 15 and a half.
You can't even take that test until you turn 16.
There you go. We got 6 months on you in Virginia.
You do.
Which also makes sense. You can get your first AR at 12 and a half in Virginia.
Yep, it all checks out.
That part about the driver's permit is true. I really do mean that part. So there's a thing, right? For a global audience that we're lucky to have with One Nation Under Whiskey. You know, here we are in Virginia, 15. Imagine being 15 and a half. Imagine yourself being 15 and a half and getting behind the wheel of a car. Just going out. Yes, your parent has to be there. Yeah. You're not allowed to ride with your friends in the car, but you can be 15 and a half for Connecticut, 16 for Scotland, England, Wales. Some might say the UK, 17, unless it's changed in my absence, right? Oh, gosh.
Interesting. So, yeah, but while we have the 16-year-old, number for driving, our drinking number is different. We're at 21. Is Scotland, is the UK still at 16 for beer and wine, and 18 for hard liquor, or is it 18 for beer and wine?
18 for going out by yourself. Yeah,
it's still, if you're with your mom and dad.
Yeah, it's 14 if you want to drink. It certainly was 14 if you wanted to have wine with a meal. The food is important.
Okay,
it's 14 to have wine with a meal. It certainly used to be. I don't know if that's changed.
Wow.
And then, I started drinking at pints at 15 in pubs with
your parents.
With family.
And you just have pints with your family at 15 years of age.
Yeah. It's like it was horrible. I didn't enjoy it.
It doesn't matter if you enjoyed it or not. The fact is you could legally have done that.
No, you couldn't. No. Oh. Pints is not legal at 15. No matter who's buying. That's still 18.
Oh, okay. So
wine is with family at 14.
Oh, that's interesting.
At a meal.
Because wine has more alcohol in it than beer does.
But you get a smaller portion of it. You can dilute that down easier. It is my guessing. Okay. God knows what's happened, right? If you told me the United Kingdom was going to remove itself from the European Union, I would not have imagined such a thing. So to be out of the country for 20 plus years, who knows what's happened to drinking laws? But certainly, when I was that age, hundreds of years ago, you could get away with that. We're not bloody French, right? No 14-year-old in Scotland was drinking a glass of wine with dinner with their family. That never happening, which is probably why it was on the books.
Oh my gosh, I want a shirt that just says "We're not bloody French."
They've been making that shirt for a long time, Greg Swartz actually. So Greg Swartz and I were talking the other day, and he started saying, "Look," he was telling me a story about one of his uncles,
and that is Greg from the Water of Life film, by the way, for our listeners' benefit.
Sure, I didn't want to give it a foie edition, but you are correct. That is exactly who he is. Yes. And Super Bowl commercial director.
Yeah, there you go.
Greg Swartz. So, I was just talking to Greg the other day, and he's telling this story about his uncle, and he starts telling me about this T-shirt, and he says, "I've looked for it in Scotland many times. I was just a young kid, but I remember it so well." Oh my gosh. And he goes on and he goes on to say, it was a Haggis Basher T-shirt. And I said, "Greg, I owned the exact same T-shirt. I know exactly which T-shirt you're talking about." It had like a ragged, stereotypical Scottish Highlander, right? A la Willie from The Simpsons, groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons, right? Yeah. Shaggy beard, shaggy hair, wearing a T-shirt himself, and in a kilt, of course, with a club, like a Captain Caveman club. And it's got him like mid-whack. You don't see any haggis, right? The famed animal, the haggis, right? Yeah. With the shorter front legs and longer back legs for running up hills. you don't see a haggis about to be annihilated, but you see this kind of almost like Yosemite Sam when he used to fire his guns and he had that kind of motion to him, to his body.
Yeah.
That's a similar motion that the haggis basher was in. And I said to him, yeah, it would probably been about 1980, 1982. I would have been 6 or 8. And he said, that's the exact time period that I got the T-shirt from my uncle.
Wow.
So, like, isn't it brilliant? Like, the whole time he's like, it's a T-shirt. I can't find it anywhere. I don't know if it's made anymore. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, I hope he says haggis basher. I hope he says haggis basher. And he said haggis basher. Like, when does that happen in life?
Wow.
So,
And they haven't reprinted it since, huh? To your knowledge.
They haven't.
Yeah.
They haven't. Right? To our knowledge, to mine and Greg's, he's gone looking for it. I think about it often as well. It's just such a striking little T-shirt. So there you go. So I told him next time I see my mum, I'm going to go through the albums which are up in the attic and see if I can find any images of myself in it. I'm almost certain there are none. And going up into the attic fills me with dread. So I'll probably never do it. But it's out there. It's out there in the world. If anybody listening knows of a Haggis Basher T-shirt, please do let us know. Questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com, no E in whiskey, or info@singlecastnation.com, and I will share that information with Greg.
Amazing. So listen, let's move beyond this, and let's prepare ourselves. And I have been preparing myself with sip after sip of this Mackmyra to have a conversation. Well, it's not our conversation. It's our very own Jess, who's done her first. This is her first field interview with
Her first solo.
Yeah, right.
First solo effort.
With Richard from Mackmyra.
Indeed. And so we started to, I think I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, but back when we were getting excited about season 6 of the Padcost, one of the things I was certainly excited about, and I know you chimed in too, was Jess getting to record some straight up solo interviews.
Yep.
And we've now made it to, I don't know what today's episode is. What's today's episode?
Sure.
12?
Yes.
13?
No, I don't know.
18?
Sure.
36.
Hut, hike.
So we have made it to episode 14 because we checked beforehand. Yes. We're knowledgeable. And wink. And finally in 14. Now we only have 26 episodes per season, so we've made it to the second half before we've queued up a solo Jess. However, earlier in the season we did have me and Jess talking with Ian McAllister at Glen Scotia.
Indeed.
So we have had a little bit of Jess on the interviewing side. So yeah, it's exciting to listen to a solo interview, right? Like even when you and I separate and we're in this stage, right? I interviewed the author Karen Abbott alone. You interviewed...
Yeah, Madhu Khanna from Indri.
Madhu Khanna. I was blanking on the second name. Madhu Khanna from Indri. And now we have Richard Mckeand, Mackmyra area sales manager for UK South. I dropped a note to Jess and said, what's the formal? Because obviously we needed it for today's masthead.
Sure.
But what's the formal? You and I always guddle through what people do, right? Works for, is associated with, is known for. And so I thought, well,
with.
good cahoots is very good. And so given that Jess went it alone and we haven't spent a second talking to Richard here, I wanted us to be able to say area sales manager for UK South. Mackmyra branch. And the other thing I do want to say before we jump off into this interview is Richard, long before we queued up an interview, long before we started talking Mackmyra casks for Single Cask Nation, long-time listener
I know.
of the Padcost.
I love it.
Did nominate us as a must-listen in the Unfiltered magazine of the SMWS.
Right.
And so that was very kind of him to go to bat on behalf of us as well.
Thank you, Richard.
So getting him an episode, getting a chat with Jess. Obviously, Jess has been instrumental in the acquisition of the Mackmyra. As she talks about in the interview, Jess has been to the distillery. You and I have seen photographs and pawed the screen saying, please, can we be there? Please. But we don't get to go everywhere, Joshua.
Nope.
No matter how much we want to.
Well, I think this interview is about to get us as close to Mackmyra, at least in 2022, as we'll get. Maybe there's hope for 2023 in a Mackmyra visit.
Yeah, well, we always hope. Without hope, we have nothing, Joshua.
I couldn't have said it better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of One Nation Under Whisky. I'm Jess, and today we are interviewing live from the other side of the pond. So I'm in Glasgow, but I am joined today by our friend Rich Mckeand from Mackmyra Distillery, who's actually down south in England. But for the purpose of this podcast, we're local, right? Something like that?
I think in the scheme of the world and where everyone might be listening from, we're pretty local, yeah.
Yeah, sort of turn right from America, and you've hit us both. So we are here today to discuss all things Swedish whiskey, but especially with a focus on Mackmyra, because we have got just about to drop our first release of Mackmyra is going live in our Single Cask Nation online web sales shortly. At around about this time that our interview is going to drop. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce to the nation and our Padcost listeners a little bit about what we have done here, and I thought you were the best person to come and ask about it. So hello, and thanks for joining me. I want to first of all ask you to introduce yourself and what it is you do for Mackmyra.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Well, it's absolute delight to be here. I'm honoured to be asked and considered. This is fantastic. I've been listening to the podcast for some time, so this is a huge deal for me, I will say. So Richard Mckeand, Rich Mckeand. I started with Mackmyra in February of 2020. I've been working trying to get a job in the whisky industry for a couple of years up to that point, and finally managed to do it. And then 3 weeks later, lockdown kicked in, and I spent a year doing virtual tastings and things like that. So I started as a brand ambassador 2.5 years ago. My title now is area sales manager for the UK. So I look after for the UK South. So anything south of Nottingham, I look after. But we've got a very small team in the UK, so we're all chipping in and doing different bits of stuff all the time, so lots of ambassador work still, and training and whatever else we go and do. So I think that's about as much of it in a nutshell as I could do. So.
It's we have very similar stories, you and I, because when I started for Single Cask Nation, we then went not quite as quickly as you did, but pretty hard into lockdown after. So both you and I feel we've done a great job traveling the world from our sofas and various virtual events, which is, I don't know, a little bit frustrating, but travel's coming back now, so we'll see. Maybe you and I'll end up in UK South. I love that description. As if the UK has like a hard line. Mentally it does, as a proud Yorkshire woman. Everything south of Yorkshire is the South, but I'm so glad that you've more or less confirmed that with your division of the UK too.
Well, we have something similar from where I am in Reading, just out to the west of London. Anything north of Watford is everyone always says is the north. So these people in the middle have got no one fighting over them, and it's a shame because there's some wonderful places there. So.
Classic no man's land. But today we're going to have a little look at Sweden. So you and I have got quite I'm going to say a little bit of responsibility in bringing Mackmyra into the Single Cask Nation family. It's not a very hidden secret that I have a lot of love for the Nordics, so I'm very excited to be the person who added our first Nordic whiskey to the collection. And as we haven't really got a lot of experience with Mackmyra, especially in the US, we're going to have a little wander through. I thought you could maybe introduce Mackmyra, where it comes from. I know there's a kind of nice opening story to this, and then we'll have a little look at some whiskey. How does that work?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, where would you like me to start?
Let's go for the beginning. I love a beginning story. So take us from the beginning of Mackmyra, because it's sort of almost the beginning of Swedish whiskey, isn't it?
Just about, I think it is, yeah. So production began in 1999, but the idea was formed, or the founders came about with the idea in 1998. We've got 8 founding members, all been friends at university in Stockholm, studying various disciplines of engineering, and to keep in contact and touch with one another after leaving. They would go on an annual skiing trip together. And a good number of years into these trips that they had, one fateful year, everybody happened to bring along in 98 bottles of whiskey. It was an unplanned thing, but everybody did it. And at some point, I always imagine, no one's ever confirmed, but in a tipsy or drunken sauna, somebody said, why is nobody making whiskey in Sweden? As you probably well know, actually, I know you spend a lot of time there, there's a huge appetite and a massive amount of enthusiasm for whiskey in Sweden. And I believe, if it's not the highest number of whiskey clubs per capita, it's up there with the very highest of them. So there's a big demand for whiskey there, but no one had been making it. I believe there was a short-lived distillery sometime in the 60s that was making a grain whiskey, and from what I've heard, I've never come across it or tried it. It was, it was a reason perhaps why it didn't last a great deal of time. But yeah, no one had attempted making it since. Everything was being imported in from, mostly Scotland, I assume. And so somebody said, why is nobody making it? Let's do it. So they set about going to do it. They went to the Swedish government and started applying for things and licensing and permission to do it. It's buying alcohol in Sweden, if you're buying it by the bottle, is quite a difficult thing to do. You have to go to Systembolaget, the government monopoly stores and things. So they thought it was going to be a bit of an uphill battle or struggle to get a distillery off the ground, but the government thought it was such a fantastic idea that they sort of fast-tracked everything, so it moved a bit more smoothly than it might have. A few of them went over to Scotland to visit some distilleries, because none of our founders were brewers, distillers. They were just enthusiasts, and so needed to go and learn how to make it. And a lot of people in the industry are very happy to help and advise, and especially back then, because there's probably fewer people going around asking for help at the time. So they had a bit of help there, so December 1999, just in time to have established 1999 on all of our marketing forevermore, and always look that it's a bit older. They managed to get the first spirit off the still. The still that they began using and used for the first few years was a tiny little 100-litre handmade still that our founders welded and built together themselves, based on a smaller scaled down sort of copy of something that they'd found at a Swedish agricultural museum, this big still that was there. And so this tiny little thing, and if anyone at home, if you give it a Google and have a look, this sort of clunky looking still that you can see on some of our logos and things here and there, you can see it. And a 30-litre cut, so a tiny thing, so it would take 6 or 7 runs to actually be able to fill a 200-litre cask. It took a long time to do anything. So to 1999, there was in a small pilot distillery, and then a series, 1 or 2 sort of garden sheds of the founders, basically, where they moved from one place to the next, I was assumed, because neighbours were complaining about the smell or the noise or whatever it might have been. And then 2002 moved into the Bruks distillery, which is where the village of Mackmyra actually is. So it's not just a name that sounds Scottish, and and that's why we chose it. It's an actual place where one of the founders was from. So about an hour and a half, perhaps 2 hours, I think, north of Stockholm. there's a place called Yavla, which is where we're distilling on the outskirts of now. But then 15 minutes west of there is where Mackmyra is. This beautiful little river island, basically, with some stables and some lovely houses and things on. And that was where our first proper distillery was set up. And then, so from 2002 until 2011, 2012, that's where we distilled. And then we'd finished building and moved into what we call our gravity distillery. So this big, I'm always excited to talk about it. So I'm sure, expand a bit more in a moment perhaps. But 35 metres tall, the world's first sort of purpose-built vertical distillery where production begins on the top floor, and then each floor on the way down is the next stage of the production process. Yeah. So, and it's interspersed with lots of cool bits of technology here and there to stop energy escaping and to recycle energy here. So it's not just gravity that's making it sort of eco-friendly and sustainable. And that's where we're distilling now. And then we've got, I know we're going to touch, well, I hope we will, on the various warehouses and stuff that we've got.
We are. You're definitely, you're getting well ahead of me. I had lots of already. I'm doing a Joshua. I'm typing my notes because otherwise I lose my chain of thought really quickly. But I think we should. You've touched on a couple of things there. So the distillery in its original form and the current form are on the east coast of Sweden. You say, it's kind of 2 and a bit hours north of Stockholm. You get to Gävle, and then the distillery's a bit outside. I was very lucky. I got to go and visit the Gravity Distillery last year. I got shown by Frederick, and it was a fantastic day out. But my journey to the distillery, I was staying in Gävle, so I walked through the forest, which I can highly recommend to anybody who wants to go and make the pilgrimage, as it is, out there. It's a very lovely way. It feels like a very civilized way to start your morning with a little walk out to the distillery where they've got a restaurant and they do events in the evening. I had a fantastic lunch for those people who like to, add food to their drink. So that's kind of where we're at. So we've arrived at, you can definitely, if you Google and have a look, the original Brooks. It's an old farm, isn't it? The original distillery is a very lovely, as you would imagine, kind of in a Swedish countryside building. And then we've gone something much more modern from 2011 on with the Gravity Distillery, which is something we have discussed in other podcasts, because there's a distillery in Edinburgh that's being proposed with the idea of gravity distilling. And
Leith,
we have also, we've discussed other distilleries too utilising it. So I think it's very cool. In my head, it sort of fits in with this very eco lagom attitude of especially the Swedes, I think, to be able to utilise something. And I guess if you've got 8 engineers as your founders, it doesn't surprise me that you're looking maybe slightly outside a traditional distillery plan.
For sure.
And ahead of its time too, for, we're talking early days, even with kind of like the regeneration of the Scotch industry. This Mackmyra is kind of fitting in around the same time, this sort of reboom and shake up from the traditional images of whiskey. So that's one of the reasons I find the brand particularly interesting to watch. And the way that it kind of constantly is evolving. You guys are always referencing, this idea of being sort of simultaneously quintessentially Swedish, which is something we're definitely going to get to in a sec, as well as kind of progressive. And I think if anybody has looked at the picture of the Gravity Distillery, that definitely encapsulates progressive in my mind anyway. It's in the middle of this forest. For those of you who are listening to this podcast driving, when you are not driving, or your hands are busy, go away and have a look at the picture of this distillery, because it's incredible. It's in the forest, and then this huge building rises up out of the middle of it. It's 35 meters tall?
Yeah.
Huge. Looks like a sort of spaceship has come down in the middle of a forest. It's it's very, very cool to look at. So perhaps we should introduce to our listeners, dear listeners, what it is that Mackmyra is doing, because you're not strictly following how we make whiskey here in Scotland. There is definitely every corner has a little Swedish twist. So I think maybe we should kind of cover from the ground up, but that doesn't work in a gravity distillery. So maybe we should start at the top down, just while we're flipping things up. I don't know how that transposes to our Australian listeners. Is that still top, up, in, out, left, right? So one of the things that I like to talk about, and our listeners always ask questions. I've got a whole stack of little things here that people have said to me, ask this question, ask. So we're looking at kind of ingredients that are all local. That's right, yeah. We've got natural water that's nearby. I remember Fred pointing it all out as we went around the distillery where things had come from. He's like leaning out the top of the tower being like, this is, where the barleys are coming from here. We're drawing our water source here. Is that part of why the Gravity Distillery is where it is because of sourcing materials?
In parts, yeah. I think when we started, all of the barley came from within 40 or 50 miles. I think as we've scaled up, all of the barley is all Swedish and it comes from only Swedish farms, but it is a bit further afield now as well. But the water would have played a factor in it. So it's the same water source where we are now as where we were at the Brooks Distillery. So I think from the I'm sorry, any Swedes. Pronunciations, by the way, I'll just say as a caveat that hopefully will run through for the rest of this interview. Some of my pronunciations are well practiced, and I think I'm not too bad at them. And others, I've never really had to say the words too often, so I'm going to say them how I say them, and hope that people can one day forgive me. But the Valbursen hills, or the springs, is where we get our water from. So it's the same water source basically from the Brooks Distillery to the Gravity Distillery.
Okay, that's also I'm definitely not. I'm not laying any claims to my pronunciations being any better. But you and I are going to do them convincingly, and therefore that makes us the authority on this. Until I get chased with pitchforks out of Sweden for my Duolingo does not teach you how to do barley terms. It doesn't teach you how to do towns. So, for example, I know that some of the barley comes from a town called Enköping, which I think is actually how you pronounce that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not how it looks written down. So, to all of our, we should maybe do little pronunciation guides. We'll put those on the labels, like, a little breakdown of phonetics of it. Well, I'll think about that. One of the things that I found particularly interesting while we're talking about ingredients, anybody who has seen my Instagram, although not recently, knows that I'm a pretty avid baker. I love baking. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Mackmyra is you guys, the yeast, because we like to get down and nerdy in this Padcost. The yeast that you guys use is Kronjest, which I think is how you say that. That is the brand that is made in Sweden and is used more famously in my house for cinnamon buns and cardamom buns and baking. And when I went to the distillery, Fred showed me the fridge where the yeast lives, and it is genuinely still 1 kilo blocks of the same yeast I use in my kitchen that you guys are using for your whiskey, which I think is really interesting. Is there a reasoning behind that?
Yeah,
or do you just really like 1 kilo cinnamon buns?
The size I couldn't speak to, but the choice of yeast is there's a very simple answer to it, and that is it. It's the only Swedish yeast that I think is the only Swedish yeast. So there might be a different one now that's perhaps come along in the last 20 years or so, but when we started in 99, one of the three founding principles was Swedishness. They didn't want to be just another sort of Scottish style whiskey that happened to be made in another country. They wanted everything, given that we were the first, they wanted to be as Swedish as possible. Not necessarily to set a precedent that others, would have to follow, but, first through the door, they wanted to be as Swedish as they possibly could. And one of the ways of doing that, and there are various ways, but one of the key ways is and easy ways is making all of your ingredients only be Swedish. And the only yeast they could choose from at the time was Kronjest yeast. And so that was all they could choose, basically. So and as it's a baker's yeast, it's used for making sweet breads and pastries and things. So when you make your cinnamon rolls, cinnamon buns, that's the sort of thing that they would use it for in Sweden. So I think it's two uses in Sweden are making pastries and us making whiskey. I'm not sure.
Whiskey too.
Yeah.
To me, this sounds like a perfect marriage. I have, no complaints here. It also means that when I write tasting notes of Swedish whiskey, but especially when I'm writing tasting notes for Mackmyra, I always get this kind of like really sweet yeasty flavour that I think is prevalent in the actual whiskey itself. But I always sort of like check myself. Is it just because I'm thinking about seeing that fridge and I'm thinking about making cinnamon buns? But I'm convinced it is there. So we'll let the nation members and purchasers of the bottles make their own decision. But I think that's quite funny. And also, as we're walking around the Gravity Distillery, I feel like maybe we're kind of doing it in my head, listeners. I'm thinking about, I'm at the top of the distillery, I'm coming back down through, looking at the equipment, and we're looking at this distillery. The grain goes all the way to the top, and then you start the process at the top, and then I guess to save transferring and energy, I think it's really clever. You just move it down through the floors, right?
Yeah, they're simple as that. So we've got two big 40-ton silos out the back, grain elevator in the middle that brings things up. So one silo will be filled with peated malt and malted barley, and then the other will be what we call elegant, so unpeated. So I think floors 6 and 7 is where sort of cleaning and sieving happens, and then milling, then mashing, all going down one floor at a time. Mashing, fermentation and distillation, and then we've got stores in the bottom floor and our lab for making things. So we use gravity to let things fall from one floor to the next, or at least for the most part, rather than using energy and pumping things from one room to the next in a traditional horizontal fashion. So hence the name Gravity Distillery, if anyone hadn't caught up with that yet. Falling from one floor to the next, I think, and there are a number of different distilleries around that have used and continue to use gravity in various parts of their process, but this is the first one that was sort of purpose built to do that as one of the main aspects of the distillery.
And it's definitely interesting because you mentioned it there, kind of. Traditional distilleries, we work left to right, or we work through a series of different buildings, which in a forest, in theory, you would definitely have floor space for. So I guess that's part of the eco values of conserving energy, where you can go up rather than out in terms of buildings. I think it's very clever. And so what about equipment inside our very spaceship Gravity Distillery? Do we have equipment that our regular Padcost listeners are going to recognise inside here?
Yeah, so everything is made, we're making, it's single malt whiskey the way it has to be made. We follow all the rules to that. I know you mentioned at the beginning there's some things where we can do things a little bit differently and put sort of Swedish twists on, and that is the case. But the main functions that have to be followed and methods that have to be followed to make a single malt whiskey, we still do. So it's very traditional looking things, except most of our stuff is sort of stainless steel, so the fermentation tanks are mash tun and everything. So there wouldn't and we do tours. It's open to the public. People can come and do tours whenever they please, as long as we're open that particular day. But anyone that wants to go over and have a look, no one would be looking around and going, "Oh, this looks very alien to me." It would look like a normal distillery, except you're going downstairs between each floor rather than across. So it wouldn't look alien to anyone going in.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to clarify that in case, as we're talking about these kind of very futuristic, people are moving away from their idea of what a traditionally Scottish distillery would look like.
We do have some futuristic things in there because it's a very modern distillery, and it was only built 10, 11 years ago now. And our founders, being engineers, they really wanted to have something that could be like as much sort of technology in there as possible. Mm-hmm. But we've got where you need somebody, for example, at the spirit safe and doing the cuts. There's humans there. There's people there doing that. But we've got some parts where for the mashing, for example, where obviously there's a lot of heat generated there and left over. That heat is captured in a closed circuit water system that we have, and then stored and can either go off to heat the offices or to perhaps be, help the stills heat up. So we capture heat that's generated in all sorts of different places and then store it in these big. So one of the things that people walking around the distillery on a tour would see would be these sort of like blue, almost sort of stand-up radiators around, sort of here and there, like 3 or 4 on here and 2 or 3 there. Those are the conversion units, I guess, for taking the heat and then storing it off in this, as I mentioned, this closed circuit water system. Yeah,
and the stills, are they? I'm just ticking off my nerd spec sheet. Are these Scottish Forsyth stills, or were they?
Yes, very happy to say, because Forsyths, if you can say you've got Forsyth stills, it feels very good. So we had Forsyth stills put in at the Brooks distillery, and they are still there now. Incidentally, that distillery was mothballed in 2011 when we moved into the Gravity distillery, and reopened in 2017 where we started making our gin there. So in the Gravity distillery, 2 Forsyth stills, 10,000 litre wash and an 8,000 litre spirit. But they're fired in a very in a way that I've never seen before. Perhaps some people can comment and let us know, because I'd be certainly curious to see who else might be doing it. But we have sort of like a vacuum heating system. I don't know the technical name for it, but the liquid is taken out from inside of the still and then sort of run through and against some pipes underneath that, and then come back in. Because we're using a vacuum system underneath, we can heat above boiling point without liquid boiling, so we're able to get to a very high temperature without boiling and sort of overcooking, any of the liquid that we have inside, be it wash or spirit. So there are some things that would be, I might say, cutting edge to sound, sound cool.
That sounds, definitely.
Yeah, but we could. It is copper still. So you walk in and it's copper pot stills. As I said, it has to be for making a single malt.
They actually stick out in comparison. Like you just said that the washbacks and stuff are all stainless steel. So you've got a kind of shiny, again, I still think quite futuristic looking distillery inside. It was quite funny to get to the floor where distillation was happening and feel like this was definitely something I was, back home with. And I felt very familiar seeing a pair of stills when I walked in the room. But there is no spirit safe in the conventional, what I am used to seeing form. There's like two glass domes that the spirits run through, which I think is pretty cool. And I think has been a question on your virtual Mackmyra in like your quizzes occasionally, because it's got the logo for Mackmyra, which we've come this far without discussing. Do you want to share what this logo that's on these little glass spirit safes? Yeah, so tell us what it is.
I think if people have a little Google of it and have a look at Mackmyra logo, we hear quite a lot of like an armless person or an upside down Glencairn glass. Actually, it's our 8 founding members, all engineers. There were no design students amongst them, I think. And so this the logo represents, so from the Brooks Distillery, where we first moved into our proper distillery. It's a very old building. It used to be a mill and an ironworks and lots of other things, and it has what is effectively a very old school cable tie to keep roofing joints together. So like a little loop, a little circular loop, and then a sort of a leathery string, if it basically would go through it.
For the listeners of the Padcost, Rich is doing beautiful hand demonstrations. This is great for an audio format, but to be honest, given that we regularly make you all guess what colour the whiskey is, I am not stopping you. He's doing. I can see perfectly the Mackmyra logo while you're doing this.
I probably should have said pause it now and then Google it, and then you can see, because describing the logo is such a unique an odd thing. But yes, what it is an old school cable tie, but I think that is actually it's representative of our who our founders and were really. There's it's not a fancy design, it's not it's not a cutting edge thing here. It's very much back to basics and a functional thing, and that's what our founders were very much that way inclined.
I like it. I definitely think, for those of you who are still not able to look this up, I think it looks like either a snowman who's had his stick arms removed, or I like the idea of an upside down Glencairn. I enjoy listening to what people's interpretations of the logo is. I think it's a fun game to play. So
we used to so if I may just quick, we used to play games of that when we were doing virtual shows during lockdown and things as well, which I think was what you're remembering there, and do it on tastings and stuff, and see if anyone could guess this, put it in the comments, and we'll send you a T-shirt or something. And no one ever guessed, because who on earth could? So we kept all the T-shirts for ourselves.
I think that's a testament to the fact that lockdown wasn't long enough. You guys didn't have enough infinite shows. Somebody would have got there eventually, I'm sure, in an infinite level. We have obviously now distilled our spirit. So everything is kind of recognisable, give or take a little bit. We've got some lovely Swedish twists here. So we have Swedish yeast. We've got local barley. I'm going to come back to peat, because I think that merits its own thought. And so we're going to fill it into casks. So I think possibly outside of Sweden, maybe not so much, but within Sweden and the UK, you're very well known for filling into a variety of casks, including Swedish oak. but also predominantly very cute little 30-litre casks. Am I right in saying that's kind of how you guys maybe came to people's attention, was these slightly smaller casks?
I think so. Yeah, it happened very early for us. I mentioned earlier that with this 100-litre still, we took a 30-litre cut. So it took a good number of distillations and runs to be able to actually fill a 200-litre barrel up. So quite early on, we decided let's just make 30-litre casks. I'm sure that they probably existed somewhere before, but from what I've heard, our founders had never sort of come across them or seen them. So we started having those made to specification for us, just so that we could just fill one cask at a time. And and to this date, it's actually now become a huge part of our business. So in Sweden, especially already, the reserve cask program that we have, where people can choose, what spirit type they like, what type of cask, and which warehouse they want to have it go into, and then fill it, put a plaque on there with their name, and then have it, bottled whenever they're ready for it. And I think it has that put us on the map, definitely in Sweden for sure, which is probably the most important market for a Swedish distillery. It's a huge part of the business there, and we do quite a lot of them in the UK and in places like Germany and things as well now. But it's a massive part in Sweden. And then things like Swedish oak. That was when we started. We wanted everything to be as Swedish as possible, as I mentioned. So all of the ingredients are Swedish: the barley, the yeast, the water. But they wanted to use just Swedish oak casks. That was the original idea, but they found out quite quickly that Swedish oak is not very conducive to sort of long term or even medium term, perhaps maturation. Individual casks can be different, of course, but it's such a powerful wood, and we leave it out now for 2 seasons to dry, so it's not put into a kiln to be readied. It's left out in the elements, and even then, that the rain still doesn't flush out all of the the heavy notes and the tannins and things to it. We use it. We use it in a number of different expressions that we have, and lots of single casts and things of it. But you have to keep an eye on it. And it's delicious. It has some wonderful and really unique properties. But they found out that really, if you couldn't just have a warehouse full of it, because it takes quite a bit of management and care.
It's a strongly powered oak. You're saying it's not necessarily like some other types of oak, which are not very good. They're very porous, so they're not particularly good at keeping the whiskey in. The angels get in very easily. So it's a flavour profile. Is that what we're saying here with Swedish oak? Yeah,
it's
flavour.
It's not much the same. But it's very similar to other European oaks, in that it's got a lot more sort of spice and less sweetness than American oak might have. Again, there's a huge spectrum of oak that is available in Europe, but it's that little bit darker and that little bit heavier than something from France, for example. Just given how much more slowly it grows in the south parts of Sweden.
Yeah. So we've got Swedish oak. We've got some. You touch there? You've got different types of wine casks and unusual spirits. Mackmyra is very well known for maybe some casks that we don't see, certainly, well, for real, we don't see here in Scotland, but I don't even think I've seen anybody else trying. So could you maybe take us through some of the more unusual casks that you guys have used?
Yeah, so when you said earlier about how we can do other things that people, for example, in Scotland might not be able to do. We don't have the SWA, or the Scotch or the Swedish Whisky Association. There's not one that exists. Saying which casks we can or can't use. So sort of within the realms of good taste and sense, we can do just about anything afterwards. After we've created our new make spirit, the way that it has to be made, we sort of the gloves are off almost for casks that we use. So one of the other ways of getting Swedishness into what we do, instead of just using Swedish ingredients, is using traditional Swedish wine casks. So Björksav, birch sap wine casks we use. A very popular birch sap wine, be very popular in Sweden and the Nordic countries. Jakt wine, which is hunting wine. which is a mixture of lingonberry and blueberry wine. Which is so hunting wine is something that in Sweden you take out to go hunting in the woods, or we had an expression that was jaktliker, which is sort of happy hunting or hunting happiness, where you go out into it was supposed to celebrate the last few weeks, the waning weeks of the Swedish summer, where you could still go out and walk around the forest and look for whatever your happiness was, be it painting a waterfall or foraging for berries or something, not just stalking deer.
Or just drinking whiskey in a forest.
Or just drinking.
That makes me happy too. The yak liquor is delicious. That kind of
it's really good, yeah.
It's sweet without being too much like drinking liquid jam. I really enjoyed the kind of like the nice balance between the whiskey that I think something we always talk about is when you have lots of different casks or finishes, you still want to be able to taste the whiskey that's in there. To me, a successful whiskey has that nice balance between the whiskey and the wood interacting in a way that doesn't mean it's screaming one or the other. And we really enjoyed drinking the yak liquor. It disappeared pretty quickly here. So it was nice and fruity.
I couldn't agree more about just speaking as a whiskey fan, not a Mackmyra man now, but I want to be able to taste the spirit character. I want to be able to taste the distillery in there. Otherwise, what's the point? And that yak liquor and Björksav that I mentioned then were part of our seasonal range, which come out twice a year, and we're attuned to the prevailing season, be it a summery springtime one or a wintry one. And the idea was that you would have the spirit character was supposed to be there, present in all of them, but then showcased in slightly different ways with these weird and wonderful casks and things. So the vast majority of the whiskey we've got maturing away is in ex-bourbon, as it is for most people out there. But we do have a huge number of I'll say it again, weird and wonderful casks. So we've had mulled wine. Obviously, mulled wine is, at least when I think about the Scandinavian countries, this perpetual Christmas. It's Christmas all the time, I think. So mulled wine is a big thing. So from Saturnus, which is quite a well-liked Swedish mulled wine producer. I should mention as well that the yak liquor and I'm trying to think of some of the other weird and wonderfuls, but we get them from a local or not a local enough sort of Swedish natural wine producer called Grytatan. So we get the wines from them and then season our casks with them, because most of these wines wouldn't often be put into casks. Yeah. So we take
like
that
mulled wine traditionally not aged.
Exactly, yeah. So we get that mulled wine from Saturnus and then we season our own casks with it to make something Swedish. At the end, so Swedish ingredients, and then also a Swedish twist on things at the tail end, and then something that isn't Swedish, I suppose, in its origin, but in terms of appetites. Green tea, so Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, love a bit of tea. And green teas and things. There's a big market for there as well. So we had one recently, and we do have some single casks of it now still knocking around, of grønt te, which was green tea. Where we had the expression that we released had 4 different green teas in there, and green tea is something obviously that never goes anywhere near a cask. No. We took 4 different green teas, and to be able to saturate that and season that into our own casks, we made a concoction of we took Oloroso, some Swedish neutral grain spirit made with Swedish grains, and then the green teas and individual and put that as a mixture together, rather than just, if you put the green tea into just neutral spirit, it would have decimated and ruined it. So instead of watering that spirit down with water, as probably would have been like the straightforward way of doing it, we thought more flavour and more fun could be had by using Oloroso to do it. So we took the green tea Oloroso concoctions, put that into our casks to season them, took that out, and then put some our spirit in, and ended up with a really sort of peppery, green, appley sweetness. Some white pepper and stuff to it. I think the expression, it was a really, really, really beautiful whiskey, and that came out probably 4 weeks after I started. And one of the things I liked about Mackmyra before I joined the company was like the innovative side and doing things that I hadn't seen other companies do before, and that they might have wanted to, but sort of hamstrung somewhat to their marketing being around and their brand being around tradition and heritage and things. And I saw Mackmyra as these upstarts that were doing all sorts of different stuff, and I thought it was really cool. But then the green tea came out just after I started, and I thought, oh, is that a step too far, perhaps? But then tried it, and it was absolutely delicious. So one of my first ever shifts were sort of co-hosting a tasting at this bar in London, and we had five of our whiskies come out, and then we brought out little samples secretly of the green tea and said, please don't share it and on social media or anything, but what do we think of this? And then that was voted the favourite by I think about 3/4 of the people in the room. So it must have been good. So then I
love any tasting that I'm at where somebody brings something out and says, here's a little sneak preview, or please don't tell anybody you've had this, is my favourite. Ultimately, it's going to be definitely the most interesting whiskey in the room. I'm convinced about 80% of the time. As soon as you caveat it with shh, don't tell anybody, that instantly you've got every single whiskey nerd in the room's attention, poised to be like, this is a sneak into the future, which is always fun to do. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This idea of having the freedom to explore what the effect that Swedish flavours can impact on the spirit as it's maturing is pretty exciting, I think, as a brand to, I imagine, in your position to try, but also it's exciting for me as a consumer to see what you guys are going to come up with next. But you've brought me to a very good point, which is about the maturation of these. So we've got our exciting casks. Mackmyra have a variety of different warehouses all over the place, not just in Sweden. You have warehouses in France and Germany as well, I think.
Yes,
the main maturation is done in the Bodø mine, which I didn't get chance to see when I was there in October, because it's not quite where the distillery is. But even the idea of maturing in a mine is pretty out there, I think. I know there are now a couple of other distilleries who are experimenting with mines. There's Bifrost up in Norway who are aging in above the Arctic's line in NATO bunkers, I think. But I think the Bodø mine was originally a mine and then it grew mushrooms. Did I read that right? You got mushrooms and whiskey?
I think there's a few years in between some of the changes, but yeah, that is effectively right. It was an iron ore mine in the 19th century, shut down for a time again, then reopened up in the early part of the 20th century, shut down again, and then I think sometime in the 70s, I think perhaps it was then opened, or the top let, so it goes a good 450 metres deep. Wow. But we're 50 metres down where we are and all the rooms that we use, and it was those rooms that we're growing mushrooms for Swedish supermarkets and things, because good environment to do it. So it's been a couple of different things over the years, and then we moved in 2005 or 2006. I think we went down there and started maturing stuff. These huge cavernous rooms. It's a shame you didn't get to see, but come out again and see us, and I'll make sure we can get something sorted out for you. But it is spectacular, and you drive up to the side of this mountain, this small mountain where the main entrance down into it is, and it's just this sort of James Bond-esque villain's lair looking entrance, and really difficult to see from any other angle other than dead on when you get up to it. And it's I've walked down and driven down into it, and it's a good, I don't know, 10 or 12 minute walk down to where the everything's maturing, and then a good 15-20 minute walk up. It's a big steep
big hill
up. Yeah,
I definitely I've got like some sort of James Bond visage of it, going to see it with all these casks. Definitely sounds like it should be something out of a Bond movie, this kind of below surface storage. I've seen the pictures, certainly make it look like an impressive place to keep your casks while they slumber away, as we would say. And it's quite a unique place to have casks maturing. If you're growing mushrooms, then that obviously must mean it's pretty moist and damp down there.
Yes.
Which anybody who's been in a warehouse in a distillery will know that the climate in which we mature whiskey is very important, because it makes a difference to the finished product, but it also makes a difference to those little angels who help themselves to our casks. I think you guys have definitely got one of the more unique twists on the climate in the Bodø mine in particular. do you want to explain? Because this is something that I have been asked about a lot. So people are tuning in to hear from the horse's mouth, as it were, the explanation as to why the Bodesmine presents quite an interesting cask on when it's finally taken back out.
Yes, yeah. So the environment down there is relatively consistent, or about as consistent as any warehouse could possibly be, really, because no elements outside are really getting to it. Temperature-wise, in there's not huge fluctuation, so it tends to be. So originally, I thought it was 5 to 7 degrees, but I think it moves a bit wider than that, so it can go down as low as 2 sometimes, and up to sort of 9 or 10. So not huge fluctuations in temperature. And the effects that can have on a cask, if you're somewhere, like in Goa, for example, big, or in the States, of course, in Kentucky, big changes. And atmospheric pressures and things that come with that as well. We don't have as great a deal as that in terms of range. But the humidity is probably plays one of the biggest factors in angel share and some of the stuff that happens inside of the cask. So humidity can be as high as 99% and is often, more often than not, teetering around 98-99%.
Wow.
When you have something, an atmosphere, and you're maturing in an atmosphere as humid as that, different things happen to the liquid in that cask, or in the cask that are in. So because of the amount of humidity in the air, the water content of the whiskey maturing in that cask doesn't really have any space to escape to, because there's already so much in the air. So we lose ABV a lot more quickly than we would angel share and volume and content. So our ABV comes down, do I want to say incredibly quickly, but compared to any other distillery people to come across, and especially the easiest comparison to make would be to Scotland, because I think it's what most people are familiar with. Perhaps obviously Kentucky and things as well, I appreciate, but and other parts of America. But our humidity means that the ABV just comes rifling straight down. So instead of say an average 12-year-old in Scotland may well still be could be in the 60s, I suppose, but you would be surprised to see it lower than the mid-high 50s at 12 years old. It definitely, anything lower than 56, 57, it would look like, oh, that's quite a low. Has this been watered down? Is this natural cask strength? So ours, a 12-year-old in a 200-litre barrel would be, could be anywhere in the high 40s, maybe low 50s, but that would be quite a high thing. So, but and then if you're looking at Virgin American Oak or something like that, where things are a bit more active and stuff anyway, then it's an even a greater or slightly greater loss again. So it's one of the odd things, I suppose, that people would see. They might see a 12-year-old single cask of ours and go, well, why is it? That's obviously been watered down. But no, it's natural cask strength. And it's got the same level of complexity. And as a whiskey fan, I'm saying this, not just a Mackmyra man, but the same levels of complexity that you would expect to have from a higher ABV 12-year-old from somewhere else, and lots of flavours and balance and things still going on. It reads odd, or at least I think it makes people curious. At least,
it definitely does, and I think we are going to be asked about that with our 2 bottlings that we have done with you guys. We have one going for, as I mentioned at the top of the show, our online membership in the US, and that has come from a new American oak, and that's the one that's about to be released, and that is 13 years old, and that naturally has come out of the cask at 47.4%. So that, especially our US audience, are much more used to seeing and are not afraid of. We've done a Ben Nevis that was in the high 60s. So we're used to seeing cask strength as bottlers who run at cask strength. We're definitely used to seeing higher numbers than that 47. In fact, that's actually remarkably close to the kind of Mackmyra bottling strength of 46.1, which is very common, which I have often wondered, why is it 46.1, not 46 or 47, or is there a science behind it, or do you just like that number?
Well, I think the 46% and lower than 46% ABV, you need to look at chill filtering something. Or at least a brand might consider
you can.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, but so I think 46.1 meant that we can all the expressions. I think or 95% of the official releases that we put out can be above that level. We don't have to chill filter, and so everything's natural colour. I think we've had one expression in the past, a Motorhead release that we did with Lemmy and the band came over and we did something special with them that had some colouring added to it, but that's because they were hell bent on making it as dark as possible, and that was virgin American oak with Oloroso finish, and so it had some darkness to it already, but they wanted it that little bit darker. But yeah, 46.1 means that we can have everything non-chill filtered. And the appetite for whiskey in Sweden is probably similar to your fan base and your customers, in that people want it to be uninterfered with and as natural as possible, and that's a huge thing for us.
Yeah, it's that's something we talk about a little bit, but obviously fans of the Padcost know that single cask nation, we don't chill filter and add colour, so it's nice to also be working alongside with brands who have similar kind of mindsets as to us. So yeah, that's that low ABV. So for a single cask to be coming out at 47.4, usually it means something unusual has happened during maturation, or you've been incredibly unlucky and had a bit of a greedy angel attacking your casks. And as you mentioned, this one that we have bottled, it was in a 200 litre cask. But inexplicably, we got 202 litres out of our cask, so maybe the angels have given us some water back.
Yeah, they've topped it up a little bit, yeah.
We obviously, I have to put a massive disclaimer in here, we have not topped the cask up. It's to do with, obviously, casks are all individually made, so there's always going to be a little give either way. For 200, maybe you get an odd litre here or there, one in and one out, either side. So the 202 litres that we got out of the cask was not for any diluting or topping up purposes, but it just made me laugh when you sent me the bottling reports. I was like, oh, this is going to be a talking point. We've got a low ABV, but a high volume of liquid. This is going to be right up the street of Single Cask Nation fans and Padcost listeners who are going to be excited to hear we've got a bit of a funky cask happening here. So yeah, and that's our new American oak that's going to the US. And then for our rest of the world markets, we've got an ex-bourbon 200 litre cask, which as the person who gets to pick which goes where, I got the spoils, so I got to pick what I wanted first. So the bourbon, I thought, was a great way to start my side of telling the Mackmyra story. So that one we got a more explainable 195 litres out of that cask. But that's an incredible volume of liquid to be getting out of a cask after 12 or 13 years. Certainly not something I would expect our bottling hall here in Scotland to be telling me when we're pulling out of, Scotch whiskies out of a cask. So that's pretty cool. Something of a point of difference. I should also, at this point, say that the two casks we have picked from Mackmyra are the elegant style spirit. But Mackmyra make two styles of spirit. So the elegant is an unpeated, and then we have Rök, which is Swedish for smoke. So that's a smoky whiskey from a nation who are very famous for their love of peat, right?
Yes.
But maybe we should talk a little bit about the peating, because I know that's something I'm always interested in. I am learning currently about peats around the world. I've been given samples from a very cool distillery that's new to me and learning about peat that's native to them. So let's chat a little bit about Swedish peat. And you've got a pretty unique process when it comes to peating the barley, right? Because that's done with Mackmyra, not with a maltster.
No, yeah, we are. I think we're one of. I think it's fewer than 10, but I always hedge my best bets or
10.
estimates.
We'll call it 10. You
I think
said 10.
Fewer than 12.
10.
Yeah. So we'll say. I think we're one of an incredibly small number of distilleries in the world that malt and peat their own barley. So, but we only do that for our peated barley. One of the reasons for that, again, going back to Swedishness and trying to and giving people provenance and understanding and knowledge that this is definitely from the place where it's from. When we started, then I think even to this day, actually, there's nobody in Sweden, any maltsters, peating barley, and we knew because of the appetite for peated whiskey and smoky whiskey in Sweden that we were definitely wanted to do both. So they were in a bit of a pickle because they didn't want to import either a peated barley from overseas or whatever other process they could do. So they decided they would have to do it themselves. So the first ever batch that we did we get the maltster we use for everything else is Viking maltings down near Gothenburg. So on
course.
yeah, exactly, on the west coast of Sweden, which is quite a distance from where we are, and our malt got sent down there, or our barley got sent down there, and then our founders went across with a couple of wheelbarrows in a big van, and went up and down on these elevators, and came down with wheelbarrows full of green malt to then be taken back to the founder's house, or one of the founder's houses, sorry, to then peat our own stuff. And again, if people can't do it immediately, or perhaps, but if you have a look on our website, and you'll be able to see the original peating shed that we made. It was almost like a dog house, or a duck kennel, duck house, whichever way around that works. And there's a traditional pagoda-looking roof on the top of it, and so we were making incredibly small amounts of it at the time. But they went to these lengths because they didn't want to import anything in from overseas whatsoever, and they had no other option but to do it themselves. So they had to then learn how to do it. A very well-known distillery in Ireland actually gave a lot of pointers and tips on how to do that in the early days. But then they realised that one of the other founding principles, I mentioned the three, were one of the big Swedish was innovation and sustainability, and it's not a very sustainable way to peat your whiskey by driving back and forth across the country with some wheelbarrows full of malt to do it. So they decided that they would need to start malting barley as well themselves, rather than ship it across to Viking, have it come back. So then we built this big sort of rectangular cuboid bin to malt a couple of foot worth of barley at the same time. So they started doing that, but to make things even more, and to use this word yet again, sort of Swedish and put Swedishness in there, we experimented with a few additional ingredients to peat. So the peat that we use is a Swedish peat. It's from the Kadinmusen peat bogs, which is about 40 kilometres, I think, away from the distillery. One of the ingredients that we then ended up deciding to use was dried juniper branches. So no berries, there's no gin anywhere near any of this. It is just juniper branches. And the reason we even considered doing that sort of thing was, again, nobody was telling us that what we could or couldn't do. After we'd followed the laws and the regulations you have to for making a single malt whiskey, as I mentioned earlier, all bets were off basically after that. So within the realms of good taste, and is it a good product, and is it something good that people would want to drink, and our founders were happy with, and they wanted to go ahead. There's thousands and thousands of years of Scandinavian tradition and heritage of adding other ingredients to their fires when curing meat and fish for the long winter seasons, to get different flavours into their food, so they're not just eating the same dried meat, and plain meat all the time. And dry juniper branches was one of the things that they used. And we found that it just worked really, really well with what we were looking for, and the flavours and the profiles that we wanted to end up with. As this sort of very resinous, sort of nutty, oily texture to it that it gives to the peat and to the smoke. A friend of mine, somewhat poetically, I suppose, when he first tried Stenselrook, which is one of our core range expressions, he said, a campfire in the rain. So it was like a smoky, like a sort of a wet smoke note to it, and I think that's the juniper branches.
That's a lovely evocative note there.
It is, isn't it?
To
yeah.
it.
I've always given him credit for that.
Let's get him on some tasting note panels. Let's get him right in that.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's interesting when you're talking about sustainability, when we've got to our peat, because I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about whether or not peat is a sustainable product to be using in the whiskey industry. Certainly I've seen a lot of contentious arguments for and against, but the addition, this juniper that you're adding into it, you guys are not going out and savaging local juniper bushes and cutting them all down. They're a byproduct, are they not, that are brought to you by the company who clear the power lines?
Yeah,
did I read that right?
Yeah, so if people haven't seen Sweden from above ever at all, you've got where the power lines run between these very rural areas, as you might be able to imagine, sort of quite sparsely populated, the northern parts of Sweden especially. The power lines need to run through huge swathes of forest, so when they're built, someone's gone through them and effectively made, a dual carriageway or almost a motorway size clearing through the forests for these power lines to be able to run through and not have trees leaning into them. And every so often the power company needs to go and cut down anything that started to grow underneath. And juniper bushes grows all over Sweden. So every so often or regularly, they'll go and chop these down and then come and drop them off to us as an offering, and I'm sure they're well looked after. But so we're not going out and hacking things down because we're it's stuff that needs to come down anyway, basically, and then it's gifted to us.
It's definitely an interesting prospect. I've never really heard of anybody who is adding things into the peating. I'm sure the listeners can write into questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com.
I've only ever heard of
one
other. I've heard of one other. If you're interested to know.
Oh yes, please.
Stowning of Denmark. I believe that they add.
Oh, Denmark.
Yeah, they add heather into theirs as well. So so they're doing their own, and that will be I assume, or I think hopefully it's safe to assume that'll be sort of, local heather to wherever their distillery and things is. So, but that's we're the only two that I've ever heard of doing it. And I think for me it's a really interesting thing because I've got all sorts of whiskies on the shelf behind me, and I like drinking lots of different stuff and trying different things. And when I first learned about Mackmyra, Svenseruk was one of the first ones I ever tried at a whiskey festival a year or two before I started, and I just thought it was a fascinating and really interesting thing, and it's something different and it's something out there, and we're not turning the game up on its head by doing anything. This isn't crazy mad stuff that's happening. It's just something a little bit of different point of difference. I think you used the phrase earlier, and
I think that's exciting. And I think as we look at Mackmyra, I think our nation members definitely will want to explore that kind of thing. But you'll have to hold your horses. We're starting with the Elegant, which is the traditionally unpeated. I like the idea of a spirit being called Elegant. That sort of pleases me. It's it adds a bit of class to it. So that's our two ones that I think I'm really excited to see go out into the wilds and hit the shelves. And like I say, the first one will be our online release for the membership in the US, or I always add a little tiny asterisk here, people who have access to a US address and a nice friend who'll sign for your parcels. Because I get a lot of people complaining this side of the pond, being like, we want this bottling. So if you've got a nice friend in America, you should, keep looking after your nice friends. So yes, I think this has been really nice. I feel like we've painted a lovely picture of our first entry into Swedish whiskey. I want to ask you though. I'm putting my Jason hat on here. I feel like I want to ask you what's got you excited for the future with Mackmyra. What do you see? Where are we going next with some more crazy casks, maybe, or experimentation?
So we've got.
I feel like you guys have ticked all the big boxes. We've got a gravity distillery, we have underground mines to mature whiskey, and we've got an incredible collection of casks for maturation. What's next in the Mystic Meg Bowl? What is
next? I mean, we've mentioned the seasonal range that we had, and I'm speaking about it in past tense there because the last release came out in spring summer just gone. That's being replaced with hasn't been given a name per se yet, the next range, but the next whiskey we've got coming out in a few weeks is going to be natural cask strength rather than 46.1% ABV. So that's quite exciting for me to be able to go and talk to people about, because cask strength, you guys, your fan base is all cask strength, or at least if you can get it, it's good, and much the same for me. So not having to talk about the ABV being lower perhaps and more typical is going to be fun for me to do that. So it's still, but even at natural cask strength, it's 47.4 I think it is coming out.
So around about what we've got here too.
Basically, exactly. And port cask finish that one's going to be, which is we've had some really, really good port cask whiskey before, and this one's going to be exactly the same. I think I haven't tried it yet because it's only just arrived in the country. You've got to wait a couple of weeks for duty stamping, and then I'll have a go. But I'm excited for that. There's talk afoot about doing something, a new warehouse as well. But I think that might have to be the extent of what I can say. I think for now.
You're going to leave us hanging with that. Yeah. It's going to be a... Okay,
part
I like
two,
that.
... Yeah.
But come back later. Oh, that sounds very exciting, and it sounds like you guys will continue being innovative in the way you are presenting and working with your whiskies, which is something we always like to keep an eye on.
Well, if I may, actually, there just to give people a little something. I mean,
Yes,
a
please do.
new warehouse being pondered or planned. One of the existing warehouses that we have, because you mentioned we had some scattered around, is on a tiny little island that makes up the archipelago that is Stockholm, and that we moved. I think that was the first satellite one that we acquired and moved into, on a tiny little island called, again. Sorry, Swedes, but Fjordeholmene. And that's it's an island. No one lives on the island. It's got a couple of boutiques and art and craft things and a brewery, a really, really good little brewery if anyone can get over to Stockholm, worth going to see. But on that island is this huge big rock that was hollowed out by the Swedish Navy some decades ago and used to store munitions, so things like torpedoes and stuff. And that's the torpedoes are long gone, but the rails going down the middle are still there that they used to use to move them up and down. And we've got that as a warehouse now as well, where you can put 30-litre casks and whatever else might be in there. So, So mentioning warehouses and teasing a bit, maybe I thought I'd mention this other. That's one of the coolest ones that we've got. I think we've got one on a mountain, one on an island, and one under a mountain as well.
If it's safe enough for munitions, I think it's definitely safe enough to be keeping whiskey in. That sounds like a safe bet for your maturation.
It's a very secure place. These big blast doors to get into it as well. And, huge, very secure spot.
And you have to get there in a boat to start with. I mean, I think that's a great spot to deter maybe mischief makers. That's lovely. Thank you very much for going through all things Mackmyra with me. I've had a great time. I really hope that our listeners manage to get a hold of one of our two or both casks when they're released. So keep an eye on all our usual emails and socials for that. But I think that really just leaves me to say thank you so much, Rich, for your time today. And we look forward to maybe welcoming you back in the future as we grow our relationship with Mackmyra.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely delighted, as I mentioned earlier, to be here, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Congratulations to Jess on her first solo interview.
Indeed.
That was very successful, very, very successful. And what a lovely subject Richard was there. I think a good person to have the first solo interview with. I do want to say, I love the way that Jess was able to pull on her time at the distillery and her working knowledge of the distillery to tease out questions with Richard there, and was able to answer some questions we've encountered along the way. You said way back in the very start of today's episode that we have the pre-release Mackmyra in front of us. And that's a Mackmyra single cask that was bottled at a cask strength of 47.4% alcohol.
Yeah.
And I love that was able to be covered in today's interview.
Yeah.
Right? The Bodis Mine got a little shout out there, which was absolutely fantastic as well.
Yeah, and it was nice to hear about the two releases that we're doing with them, right? The 2007, which is in our glass, that's the Virgin Oak one, or New Charred Oak. And then there's the Virgin Oak is the 2008, I should say. The 2007 is the ex-bourbon cask. Now, that hasn't been bottled yet. And but if I remember, when we first tasted that cask, similarly, it was a lower ABV. Equally delicious for different reasons. But, it was interesting. And I know we'll talk about this in a little bit. I kind of want to do a tasting of this cask with you for our listeners.
I would love to.
Someone had asked me, what is it like? I've had Mackmyra before, but I've never had Mackmyra in New Charred Oak. And I had to rack my brain of examples I can give where, because it's malt whiskey, but in New Charred Oak, it's got that bourbony kind of quality, but not that, it's not overly sweet It's not overly tannic. Not that bourbon always is, but it has the potential to be. In part because of the corn that has a different sweetness and, deeper char levels, things like that. But it got me to thinking about what Glenmurray has done over the years with some of their new charred oak and their virgin oak releases.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like the Mountain Oak series. And I find this to be similar to those releases, which are some of my absolute favorite whiskeys from Glenmurray. I just think malt whiskey in new charred oak can be wonderful. And when it is wonderful, it can't be anything other than wonderful. And I'm so happy with how this cask came out and that they would release it to us.
100%. Yeah, I've been excited about this since samples first appeared on our desk, and we're very close to releasing it. If you were listening to this before September 25th, 2022.
So listen, before we go on to the tasting of this Mackmyra, I know which again is unreleased, and we'll talk about that maybe in the news section a little bit. There's a couple of other releases that are about to come out that I wanted to highlight in the news. So I'm not even gonna ask you, Jason. It's been a while since we heard the Paperboy's voice, and I kind of miss him, so I'm gonna bring him in.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble.
So,
again.
we've got two whiskeys coming out. September 8th, I want to say. Do I have that correct? Yes. And these are U.S.
The one time you don't make a declarative statement. Let me answer you, Joshua.
Go ahead.
They are coming September 8th.
There you go. September 8th. And these are U.S. exclusives, not just U.S. exclusives, but U.S. online exclusives.
Indeed.
And so maybe it was last episode, maybe it was the episode before that. I can't remember, but we gave sort of a general overview. But we're going to hyper-focus in on these two. So we've got our 9-year-old Dalyue.
See, before you hyper-focus,
Okay, all right.
can I draw attention to some history and some present?
Yes.
He's like, what the hell is Jason
Yeah, I
talking
have
about?
no idea what's going to happen right now.
I'll give a yes to that. Towards the end of August, we released two M&H casks, one ex-Isla, one ex-Bourbon. Ex-Isla, about half the outturn of the ex-Bourbon.
True.
The ex-Isla sold out lickety-split, took just a few days. The ex-Bourbon, because of the larger outturn there, we're proud to say we still have sitting on our website. So if you're in the US and you want to partake in an M&H ex-Bourbon single cask for $95,
Yeah.
it is sitting on our website. I love being able to say that, Joshua. We made a point of getting to this point where we have enough releases and enough sizes that we can keep pleasing people and not just be one and done on any given release day.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, some people talk about the idea of its feast or famine, and we've never had anything beyond. I shouldn't say we never had, but in recent history, it's been a release comes and it goes within minutes, within a couple hours, within a day, and we're straight back to famine, and there really is no feast. We're now at the feast part, where it's not just, 50, 60 bottles of this M&H left, but we still have some of our Beanley rum, and we still have some of our Torridon, blended whiskey, and our Sheriff Muir blended whiskey, and so on. So yeah, check it out, singlecasknation.com, whether it's the M&H or some of the others. And we have that $15 flat rate shipping. So you get 1 bottle or 6 bottles, it's going to be the same rate.
We definitely talked about that last episode.
So with that in mind, can I bring us to the present?
You're taking us to the future.
Oh, I'm taking us to the future. What's the present, Jason? Is it
Present
Jacob Marley?
Bottles are available for sale on our website.
Ah, list them out, Jason. I only listed some out.
Sheriff Muir,
Bam.
Beanley,
Bingo bango.
Virginia Distillery Company,
Whoop whoop.
Black Button,
Hey now.
M&H ex-bourbon.
Nailed it.
Thank you.
Beauty.
Mic drop. I'm glad it's on an arm here, or I would have dropped it.
Can I go into Christmas Future now?
Please.
Okay, so Christmas Future involves our 9-year-old Daluane that spent a bit over 8 years in first fill bourbon and was accidentally put into a first fill sherry cask. And people keep on asking, how does one accidentally do that? And I said, oh, it's just easy. You put Jason in charge of filling out spreadsheets. He'll make that happen any day, every day.
I tell you, 10 years, and I haven't made that mistake. 1 year of having a re-racking program, and I've gone ahead and made that mistake.
Shag one sheep.
It's so, yeah. Oh gosh, I could say words here. You know how we tell people, like, if you look at various whiskey people's social media, it looks so wonderful and it's so much to envy. And then you hear our podcast and we talk about, oh, we were excited when the Mackmyra samples came in and we selected casks. And then we tell people the vast majority of our job is spreadsheet based. And I spend so many hours of so many weekdays knee deep in spreadsheets. Mistakes are inevitable. I've just never made a mistake that's taken a first fill bourbon matured Daluane and finished it in a first fill sherry hogshead.
The good news is it was delicious as first fill bourbon.
It was.
And
It was absolutely cracking. We would have bottled it.
And here's something I want to say really quickly about that. You know, usually, not always, but usually finishing is done to fix an issue, right? Not necessarily that it's a bad whiskey, but it's a whiskey that needs a bit more dimension to it, you know, so it becomes a bit more expressive. And that's usually
Says the
why.
man in the company that's just adopted a re-racking program in the last year.
But my point is, you can put whiskey into a cask for finishing. It's not guaranteed that the finishing is going to do good things. We've got a couple of casks in our inventory right now that's been sitting in sherry that we are not happy with at all. So we're just playing the waiting game to see when it turns around. So my point is, this could have been a really, really bad mistake, but it started off in first fill bourbon delicious, and then 11 months later, or 10 months later, whatever the amount was, in first fill sherry, made it deliciouser than
I
it
think
even
it made
was.
it delicious in a different way. Like it brought those dark fruits to bear upon first fill bourbon deliciousness, right? And so I think it added a chapter to the story rather than rewriting the book.
There you go. So is this a chapter to a story? Is this, you know, Fellowship of the Ring becomes Two Towers? It's definitely not Matrix becomes Matrix Revolutions.
No.
No. Yeah. Or
Talk about ruining a good thing.
Raiders of the Lost Ark becomes Temple of Doom. No. No. You know what this is?
All right.
This is A New Hope
Yeah.
becomes Empire Strikes Back. That's what it is, Jason. Anyway.
Declarative statement.
Very declarative. So the other whiskey, and by the way, that Daluane, what's the price on that one, Jason?
105. 105.
Solid price. And how many bottles on that?
240.
Beauty. And then the other whiskey that will be released alongside of that will be the first Paul John. Oh,
Before you move away from this,
okay.
could I read the truncated tasting note?
Please do.
Thank you. Warm, rich, and nutty, with toffee, fruitcake, and drying oak notes. A slam dunk of a dram for the sherried whiskey lovers among us.
Sorry for all the clinging and clanging. Just those truncated notes got me a bit excited. So I kind of my legs started shaking like a dog's leg shakes when it wants its when you're scratching its butt.
What I love about this truncated label note is that invariably we have the number kind of 35 words to play around with in the space that's available on the label. And sometimes that comes down a wee bit, a word or two. Sometimes it goes up a word or two. This label note is 25 words. And it goes to show that when you say what you came here to say, you get done. You just finish. Don't keep going. Just be done. 25 words. Boom. Slam dunk of a dram.
So to make you done, I am going to talk about the Paul John.
Interesting.
I was being fresh. I'm very fresh today. Being very naughty. So the other whiskey that we're releasing at the same time as the Deluane, again on September 8th, Single Cask Nation US online exclusive, is our first Paul John for the US. Ooh, there it goes. And this is a 5-year-old, first fill bourbon, but it is peated Deluane, which is it's almost like a smoky, sorry, did I say peated Deluane? I meant peated Paul John. So it's a peated Paul John, which makes it almost it's like a smoked oatmeal cookie for me, Jason.
Oatmeal raisin cookie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You need the raisins there, but it's that cinnamon, right? And it's that sweet brown sugar and oatmeal, and the sort of deeper sweetness of the raisins coming through. So this one, again, 5 years old, 56.7% alcohol, and this is an Indian whiskey, so therefore the angel share is quite high. And so after 5 years, there was only 160 bottles remaining, which is not a lot. And one of the reasons I grabbed the bottle is I got excited. You were reading the truncated tasting notes for the Deluane, so I said, you know what? I'm going to read the truncated tasting notes for the Paul John. But then when I look at the label, it says, and rightly so, this is one of our Spirit of Collaboration bottlings. So this is where we worked directly with the distillery to partner on these bottlings. So there are no truncated tasting notes to talk about. But yeah, I think a peated oatmeal raisin cookie is all you need to know.
Yeah, the presentation of the grain is remarkable.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
It's a really wild. And then you get some of those tropical fruit notes kind of coming in and out and roundabout. The peat isn't overwhelming. It's certainly there. I think it's complementary.
Yeah, and it's not Isla peat, right? So it's not doing
and
any
that's
of
what
that.
I was just about to say. Yeah.
So it's none of that
It's
coastal
a framing.
stuff.
Yeah, it's a framing, more wood forward smoke.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So
It's cracking. Really cracking.
This one's going to be 145. So
Correct.
A bit more expensive than the Deluane. We understand that completely, but hey, if you look around, Paul John single casks are around the same price, and the fact,
if not more.
And the fact of the matter is, dealing with logistics from India to Scotland to the U.S. with air freighting in and global logistics, things just cost money these days, and so we were pretty happy to get our price right around where Paul John is doing their own single cast within the U.S. So there you go. You got any other bits of news to add, or can we move on to the tasting of our Mackmyra?
I would tease, as Jess did in the interview, that we have a Mackmyra coming down the line for ROW, the rest of the world market. And we are working on that next release for the ROW, the rest of the world. And as we've mentioned previously, it's worth reiterating, Canada is bringing in a host of cases in anticipation for OND, the end of the year buying period. And so if you're one of our Canadian listeners, and I know there's many of you out there, you've got some product coming to market very shortly.
Oh, it's so exciting being in Canada again. And it's such a great market. Our importers there are fantastic. Their clients,
100%,
wonderful.
100%.
Being able to work with our dear friend, Graham Usher, and his shop has been great. So all of that
Absolutely.
is very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, Josh. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yep.
Jess and Elijah work on Canada, and they're killing it. Our importer's killing it. Graham Usher's killing it. That's fantastic all the way around.
Yep. Now that we have all of that business behind us, and I will call that business. I mean, it's fun talking about it, but that really is the businessy end of things. I want to pour a little bit more Mackmyra because, if I'm being honest, I finished what was in my glass. And I want to go over some of these notes.
I've finished what was in my glass twice. Oops, that's another big pour.
Twice on Sunday?
Apparently today is Sunday, even though it's not. Oof, yeah, that's a good pour. I got lots of notes to share on that one.
So I would suggest we keep this portion of the tasting a little shorter because we're going to be coming out with a tasting video that'll be a bit more in depth. But I just want to kind of tease everybody on this, if you wouldn't mind, Jason.
Just as you mentioned, keeping this a little shorter than we might normally would, our last episode featured a blind tasting by us where, I don't like to toot our own horn, but I think we did quite well. I'm not going to go too deep into spoiler mode here for any listener who hasn't heard it yet and they're maybe working their way backwards, but we got a text. I got a text
from
Seabass.
Yep.
Okay.
I just haven't
So
read it
Seabass,
yet. Now I'll read it.
Right? Okay. So Seabass is behind Blind Barrels, and we've been doing the blind tastings, and he led with a compliment, which I like compliments, not necessarily when they're about Joshua, but he led with fantastic interview with Madhu from Joshua. There you go. Yeah, I don't disagree. I thoroughly enjoyed it myself. And I said it on wax. I have committed to that position.
I agree with him wholeheartedly.
The opening man love has been a lot, and I have had other people reach out to talk about the opening man love, but hey, you and Madhu, you guys do you. I'm not gonna harsh anyone's mellow. So the part Seabass continues with is, you guys crushed, and I will say here, the blind segment. I haven't named anything. Seriously impressive, and I think the listeners will give you a pass on mistaking a barely legal blank for potentially being a different blank. And then there's a winky face there. So as I said at the time, we need a win wherever we can get a win. Mm-hmm. So long as we don't misidentify our own SCN bottlings for something else, Ben Nevis, spoiler alert, I think we did pretty well that last time out.
I really, the fact that we nailed the distillery, I'm clinging on to that.
So with that said about the last blind tasting, I wanted to give some context to what you were saying about us keeping this a little bit shorter and us doing our own tasting videos. Oof, there's a treat for people. You can actually watch us taste whiskey and talk at great length about esoteric tasting notes.
Indeed. So speaking of esoteric tasting notes, so first off,
oil.
The color, I would call that an almost copper or bright copper. I wouldn't call it bourbon color, but it's definitely got some depth to it.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't go. Yeah, it's nowhere near bourbon as I know it.
I would call it
But it
either
is-
copper or like deep brass.
It's got kind of an olive oil kind of presence to it as well. Just the way it turns in the glass.
Okay.
As
Yeah,
everybody can see.
Well, it does have some gorgeous legs along the glass, so nice. It's going to be viscous. We
Absolutely.
know this. On
As
the,
ZZ Top said, it's got legs and it knows how to use them.
the nose, for me, is a combination of straight up barley. There's like some really good grain presence coming through, but there's you've got some of that bourboniness coming in as well. There's a bit of toasted coconut. There's a bit of vanilla going on, but then you got things modifying it. There's almost like a melon, like a bright melon note, like a honeydew maybe.
Do you know that since we covered soft, when Dan Gryson wrote in to ask about soft,
Yeah.
we've just done a bunch of tasting notes for the company and a bunch of labels for the company. And I have spent so much time thinking, oh, I would describe that as soft. Oh, here's something else I would describe as soft. I've got soft on the brain, and not just because I had my 48th birthday over the summer, but I'm just thinking soft constantly. And as I'm sitting here with this Mackmyra, it's so delightful on entry.
Yeah.
Like it's not aggressive, it's not abrasive, and I think that's one of the things for you and I when we first heard Virgin Oak. Like, okay, would this be tight? Would this be a lot on the palate? And it's really not. It disperses its flavors very fairly across the palate and has this lovely softness of experience going on at the same time.
Man, there's that. I can't get past that melon note. At first, I was getting it on the nose, but as I'm tasting the whiskey, it's coming through across the palate with some added, like almost a nuttiness coming through. Are you getting that melon, or is it just me? No, okay.
No, it's part of that. It's part of the brightness without it being sharp.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a roundness to it. I think melon is a great quality.
Yeah, that is a softer sweetness coming through. That
Right.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way. That's a good way of putting it.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of coconut. I think you said coconut on the nose.
Yeah, for
Did
sure.
you say coconut on the palate as
Yep,
well?
Yep. Toasted coconut.
Continuing.
It's almost like the slivers, right? Those toasted coconut sliver, not the shredded, like almost dusty stuff, but the actual slivers that you get.
That sits there really easy. Really easy.
There's a real honeyed quality coming through too, as it sort of transitions from the palate to the finish. You get this honey kind of quality coming through, and then some of that. And I'm kind of reminded of our Paul John here, but some of those baking spices coming through. You get the honey, but then you get a bit of that nutmeg and a little bit of ground ginger, very subtle. I wouldn't call this spicy, but it's subtle.
For me, those baking spices manifest towards the back of the palate as it transitions into the finish.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting in this cask strength of 47.4. I'm reminded of our Oishis, and we've talked about our Oishis in different places. You know, natural cask strength at 40, a natural cask strength at 42, 43, and how that affects the drinking of it. So even though you haven't diluted it down, you haven't watered out those lipids, right? Instead, you've still got all the oils, you've still got all the flavors, but much less of the alcohol coming with it. And you and I talk constantly. We have no issue with 66%, 60%, 50%. 47.4. This would be a lovely little breakfast dram. This would be a nice little start to it. Maybe with your oatmeal, maybe with your Paul John oatmeal raisin cookie.
Oh yeah. Put it in with your cereal. There's, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to our original comments around selecting this, and this didn't come out so much to my memory as it is now on the finish. the oak presence grows. The oak really comes out without being astringent, but it's enough to tell you, like, this is virgin oak, right? This is charred oak. This didn't hold anything else. So you're getting a good whack of oak without that astringency, but you're getting some of that spice coming through and some of that warmth coming through.
I get kind of a chocolate quality as well, kind of across the palate, and then through the finish as well. It's been interesting. Jess and I were having this conversation just the other day about the flavometer.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, I think of the flavometer a bit like, oh gosh, why am I blanking? An equalizer, right? I think of our flavometer like an equalizer for music, right? Where unless you'd really dialed up the volume, you really wouldn't get all of the bars on your digital equalizer being level. But they would take on a shape, a parabola, if you will.
Ooh.
And that, thank you. And that parabola would tell a story.
Someone ate a dictionary today. I love it.
Yeah, these are not prepared words. Let me just be.
You're just
I'm not reading
naming
from a sheet
songs
right
from
now.
Tool. That's it. What's a Tool song? Parabola. There you go.
Right, and that parabola would tell you a story about the music. And one of the things that Jess and I were discussing was, when we're kind of looking at the flavometer, if you were to just simply turn the flavometer on its side, and I know that it's de rigueur to put bottles of whiskey on their side right now.
Yeah.
So far, Single Cask Nation has not followed suit. But if you put the bottle on its side and you see that flavometer kind of reaching up into the sky instead of going left to right, I think there are moments when a whiskey will tell a story of being rich and oaky, or floral and sweet, right? But it'll go up and it'll come down, it'll go up and it'll come down, it'll look a little bit like a roller coaster. The reason I go into this is because looking at the flavometer on our Mackmyra, the dial has been turned up and there's less of a rising falling parabola on here than we encounter in other labels. And I implore our listeners to go find a Single Cask Nation bottle or two or three, hell, buy them all, and have a look at the flavometer on them. This one is showing 4 for floral, 5 for sweet, 7 for rich, 5 for nutty, 6 for spicy, 4 for earthy. Those are notes really dialed up. That volume has been turned up on those. Then it falls back, 1 for smoky. Maybe there's a bit of barrel char in here. And then back up for 4 on oaky.
Yeah.
It's a pretty pronounced experience.
It really is. And as you were going through that, I was thinking to myself, wait a second, why is it 4 on the floral? We did that for a reason. When I went back to the nose, now I remember what you and I said almost in unison. We said, it's like a summer meadow. Right? It's that summer grass, it's the wildflowers, it's that baking heat that kind of activates all those smells and the humid air. Like it's all of it. And that brings out that floral quality. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the dial is up on this one. And yet, like turning up an album that then blows out your eardrums, this at 47.4 has those pronounced notes without any increased alcohol that could potentially blow out your palate, not quite your eardrums.
Yeah.
That 47.4 allows this cask to really sing. And to reiterate, we have not diluted it down to that.
Nope.
That is how it came out of cask, like an Oishi. I always say Oishi because I really am a big fan of Oishi, and I have a lot of bottles from Oishi. Fulcano's the same, am I right in saying that? Fulcano has the 40-something ABVs?
Exactly, right? Because the process is the same, where they're taking every bit of the distillate, including, the heads to the tails, everything. There's no cuts whatsoever. And the average ABV of that alcohol when you're done distilling ends up being around 45-46%, and they just pop that into the cask. And so there's never going to be an Oishi or Fulcano whiskey that will be above 46. Like the ABV is just kind of going to go down, up and down, but slowly on a downwards trajectory. Hence the lower ABV.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny. I like Focano plenty. I don't own nearly as much Focano as I do Oishi. And then Oishi is the one that I return to and always reference.
And that totally makes sense because Oishi focuses on the ex-brandy casks and ex-sherry casks. And then they do other things, right? Ex-Isla, port, etc. Where Focano tends to focus on new charred oak or ex-Focano casks, sometimes red wine. And your palate doesn't always go towards that. You like you like the ex-sherry, you like the ex-brandy, you like the Isla casks, etc. So it makes sense.
The Mizunara, absolutely blew me away.
Yep.
Absolutely. To be honest with you, since we're always honest on the podcast, I wasn't a big fan of the ex-Isla. The ex-Isla Oishi wasn't.
I'm so glad you said that. Oh, can we talk about this just really quickly?
Sure.
You had the first iteration of the ex-Isla cask, which I have always been honest about. I've never been a fan. It didn't hit. I just, for my palate, I didn't think it worked. I told Chris Udy that, who put it together. And I say to people, do you like this? Awesome. I'm so glad you like it. It doesn't work for me, but I'm glad you like it. I have since tried other iterations of it and think it's cracking. Oh my gosh, it's gotten so good. The Isla character really comes through on the newer versions, where the Isla character I don't think came through properly in the first version. There was a peated quality that came through quite nicely, but the Isla element seemed to be lost for me. And in the newer ones, boom, it's right there, and it works really nicely. I'll get you a sample of some of the new stuff. I have a half a bottle. So when we see
Listeners,
each other,
you heard it here first. Neither one of us will remember this 5 seconds after we hit stop on the recording.
Remember what?
Next time I'm at your house, what was it I was going to pour for you? All the things. Just start now.
Please, just keep it going.
We'll just go left to right, and we'll wrap this up in about 3 months. Anyway, back to Mackmyra, the thing we're selling.
Oh yeah, that's right. Listen, I really think that this is a cracking whiskey. I've had my fair share of Mackmyras over the years, samples here, bottles there, and have really enjoyed watching the evolution and the ride that they've gone on. I think they've finally landed for what they're doing now. It was nice to see the work in progress, and I think they've landed. And this one is just an absolute cracker of a cask, and I'm so proud to have it.
Well, and to get a 2008 cask and get that kind of Mackmyra history is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So yeah, that's a cracker. You would pour that quite happily for any friend that comes over. Oh. You would start with it. You wouldn't build up to it. Even though it's virgin oak, you would start with it at that 47.4, and I think that softness of it. Yeah. Because it is soft. Yeah. I wouldn't be misled by the cask. I would instead go with the alcohol on it.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me a bit of our, not specifically flavor-wise, but it reminds me a bit of our 24-year-old pre-fire bourbon, where the ABV was a bit lower. I actually think it was 47.4. I think it was a similar ABV. But what was so nice about it is it presented all of those big bourbon flavors in a slightly softer format with that wonderfully spicy finish to it.
What did you think the strength was on the bourbon?
I thought that it was 47.4.
You're exactly correct.
Look at that. Two whiskeys at 47.4, and I'm getting the same.
And that's how I know.
Oh, that's how you know. All right. I'll pour a little bit, because I'm going to pour us a little bit to get us out of here, because we do need to be vamoosing.
Yes, we do. But there's a Vino Seal going back in a bottle. Yeah, I liked the way you talked about that That is wild that they're both 47.4 though. That's
right,
really crazy.
But they both, and
that was not by design.
That was not by design.
Honest, that was not by design.
That was both the natural, the cask strength on the both of them. What I like about the ABV is that you're presented with full-on flavor, just like you had said when you talked about the flavometer, and it's almost like the dial is turned all the way up. But you're presented with that flavor in an ABV that's just easy. And naturally easy, right? Natural cask strength.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a special
bourbon.
whiskey. Holy crap.
I haven't popped a pour of that in maybe a year. That's in all honesty with the listeners. The open bottle is what? It's about 2/3. It's 2/3. Bourbons, I think.
And I'm at 1/3.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I've got 2/3 left. You've got 1/3 left. Bourbon's not a thing I pour of an evening. It's not a thing I think to reach for. But when I have friends come over,
It's a sharer. Yeah.
Even Scotch-loving friends, I will often pour them a bourbon and often have a chat around that. And obviously this kind of special Heaven Hill. Oh. And obviously this kind of special undisclosed Kentucky bourbon.
Oh, it's so heavenly.
Is,
it's so heavenly. Listen, I'm going to
Joshua,
stand on that hill.
Joshua,
I'm going to die on that hill.
Joshua,
I may die on that hill, Jason. What?
Joshua.
What'd I say?
You may die on that hill, I'll be honest. Anyway, we're not here to talk about whiskey.
No, we're just getting excited about right. We could just keep on going and say, "Oh, that reminds me of that whiskey." And then, listen, we do need to get out of here. So Jason, thanks to you as always for being my partner in basically everything. Thanks to Jess for getting out there and doing her first solo interview.
Yep, tickety boo.
And to Richard at Mackmyra for being her first interviewee. And of course, to our listeners, I almost said we wouldn't have a podcast without you, but the fact of the matter is we definitely would have a podcast without you because...
Maybe not 6 seasons worth of podcasts. We might have given up at some point with no listeners.
Yeah, but it's too much fun just sitting, chatting, talking. But so for those of you that do listen, and we know there is a good number out there, we truly thank you. We thank each and every one of you from the bottom of our heart. So let us get out of here on that. Jason, listeners, Jess, Richard, I raise my glass to you all, and I say, cheers, big ears.
I represent that comment.